Mrs. Janti Gunawan as today's moderator, who will lead our discussion to join us and lead our today's agenda. Hello, Mrs.
Hello,
Janti.
yeah.
Yeah, how are you, Miss?
Yeah.
I
Thank
hope,
you.
yeah, I hope stay safe, yeah, Miss. And I hope all of us are given good health in this time of the pandemic. Without further ado, to Mrs. Janti Gunawan to lead our today's agenda. Place and time is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Yeah. Good afternoon. Good morning to Beth. This is 8:30 there in the UK. And good afternoon to everyone here. It's a pleasure to have you all here. So we have how many people? 220. Oh, it's keep increasing. 224 registered participants will be more than that, but I'm not sure because the weather here is raining. We will have very interesting event today with Professor Elizabeth Rose, and also we will have some company representative and also government official. Before we start, I would like to invite Dr. Sarifa Hanum, Eva, as our head of department to formally welcoming you. That, yeah. Ibu Eva, are you there?
Hello, Bu Yanti, thank you. Good morning, Professor Rose. Hello, how are you? I don't know if you remember me, but I remember you very well. So we met like ages ago when I was still a junior lecturer, industrial engineering department. Yeah, do you remember that? And then when I was working on my PhD in Switzerland, I had a conference in Helsinki. I tried to contact you, but unfortunately you were in New Zealand. I don't know if you remember any of that, but it's so happy to see you again virtually. You're still beautiful as you always were. Yeah, it's our great honor to have you here. Finally, after like I don't know how many years we haven't heard from you. Yeah, Dr. Yanti brought you back to us. So hopefully it will keep going on with something else after this. Thank you again for investing your valuable time to share with us. I hope you're very healthy and safe there. Thank you. Back to you, Dr. Yanti.
Thank you, Ibu Eva. Yeah. Everyone, yeah, we will. Without further ado, I would like to first introduce Professor Elizabeth Rose. Professor Elizabeth Rose was my PhD supervisor when I studied at the Victoria University in Wellington, New Zealand. She is my role model, and I still trying to follow her path in academics. She has extensive and impressive achievement in the academic, and here I'm still trying to follow her, but here I read her bio for you. Elizabeth Rose is a professor of international business at the University of Leeds in the UK. She is also an adjunct professor of business policy and strategy at the Indian Institute of Management in the Udaipur, India. Her previous academic appointment has been in the US, New Zealand, and Finland. So if we talk about international business career, we are very lucky to have Beth here. She is a dual citizenship. Yeah, she holds a dual citizenship, US and New Zealand, who built her international academic career working and living in various countries. I remember I was a New Zealand university student. Beth was working half semester in Finland, and we need to meet. I need to get her direction for my study. So we meet for supervision at the conference in Milan, Italia. She gave me a reference so I can work at the conference, attend the conference, buy my ticket, and then discuss the result, get her direction. Uh, it's also a luxury for me as a student, visit Milan and also go to Venice. I would say that I am very lucky to have her as my supervisor. So thank you again, Beth. For some of you may not know, as Ibu Eva mentioned before, this is her second engagement with ITS. We at the time, about maybe 12 years ago, we asked Beth to visit us to have her time, her generosity to stop over on her way from Finland to New Zealand. At the time, she was working part-time in like half the semester in Finland and half the semester in New Zealand. So she stopped at Singapore, and at the time we only able to organize a guest lecture from within Asia. Yeah. So now we welcome back to Indonesia, Beth. So we are very lucky to have you today. Let me continue again. Beth's research addressed various aspects of how firms internationalize and compete across borders. Working at the intersection of international business and strategy, she is especially interested in the internationalization activities of firms from emerging markets, especially from small companies, small firms. Not surprisingly, for someone who started academic career as a statistician, most of her research is quantitative in nature and emphasizes the use of robust approach in modeling. That said, many years in Nordic countries in Europe have given her a well-developed appreciation for qualitative research, and she is currently involved in qualitative data collection in India. Beth's work has appeared in a variety of top-tier journals, including the Journal of International Business Studies, Strategic Management Journal, Journal of World Business. This is all Q1. So she served on several editorial boards and is an co-editor-in-chief of Academy of Management Collection and Review of International Business and Strategy. She is an elected fellow of the Academy of International Business, AIB, and was named Woman of the Year by the Woman of the AIB, WAIB, in 2019. Beth has held leadership roles in several academic professional organizations. She served as Vice President for Administration for the AIB, Academy of International Business, where she worked closely with AIB chapter around the globe. She was the founding chair of the AIB Australia and New Zealand chapter. Now it's called AIB Oceania, and is past president of both the Australia and New Zealand International Business Academy, or ANZIBA. And she's also the past president of Association of Japanese Business Study, AGBS. In the Strategic Management Society, SMEs, she has been chair of the Global Strategy Interest Group. Beth recently completed a 5-year term on the Executive Committee of Academy of Management, International Business Division, and was division chair for 2018 to 2019. She is on board of the European Institute for Advanced Studies Management, EIASM, and was co-chair for the 2019 European International Business Academy Conference. Without further ado, please welcome Professor Elizabeth Rose, who will present her research in innovation and international entrepreneurship. Her research has been used for studies in the policy and for companies and universities development for innovation and international entrepreneurship. Beth will present for about 45 minutes, and then we will have discussion afterward. Beth, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Yanti. I'm feeling old. Anyway, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you so much for all the participants. We're up to 280, I think. So I'm really thrilled to be here and look forward to a good discussion after I present my ideas. Now I will, okay, somebody's gonna have to tell me if my screen.
The voice is gone. Hello, Beth? Oh. Beth, the speaker is off.
I keep unmuting myself. There, okay. Is the screen showing? Yes?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Yeah,
now it should be.
Yeah, perfect.
Yay. I wish Zoom would make it clear to the speaker. Okay. Again, thank you so much for your wonderfully warm welcome. I'm really happy to be talking about stuff that I really enjoy researching. I'm doing a fair amount of work now. Most of my work when I started was looking at large firms, and increasingly I'm looking at small firms now, and also with another former doctoral student looking at innovation as well. So I'll talk to you a bit about some of the things that I think are really interesting that we really don't know about international entrepreneurship and innovation, and then talk a little bit about, obviously I can't predict where we're going to be in a year's time in terms of COVID, but talk a little bit about some of the opportunities that have been raised by COVID, by the pandemic, because in some regards, it's an interesting time for international entrepreneurship. It's always an interesting time, but this is a particularly interesting time. Just to give you, Yanti's already given you a wonderful introduction, a very flattering introduction to my journey, but I wanted to, since many of you are students, I wanted to share a little bit more detail about what I would view as a rather messy journey to get where I am now. And basically, I'm from New York City, born in New York City, grew up in the New York area, was fortunate to do my undergraduate studies at Princeton University. I went there because I was going to study Russian history. And I then fell in love with bridges. I don't know if you can see that, but that's a gorgeous bridge. And I ended up with a degree in civil and structural engineering. I was lucky to be at a place that let me make that shift and still graduate in 4 years. This was not sort of playing to my strengths, but it was something that excited me. And so I think it's really important to follow your passion. After Princeton, I worked for Ford Motor Company as a product design engineer. Not terribly interested in cars, but it was an interesting experience. And I quickly learned that I don't enjoy being in a large multinational corporation. I had grown up in the context of a small family firm, and it was daunting to realize that I had more power, more influence in the small family firm when I was 17 years old than I was ever going to have at Ford Motor Company. And as a bit of a control freak, that kind of irritated me. So I decided, okay, I'm going back to academia. I'm a flaky academic at heart. And so I went to the University of Michigan. I started a PhD program, and it sort of says a lot about me that many of my friends from undergrad said, okay, yeah, what are you doing a PhD in? You're going to do French, you're going to do engineering, what are you doing? So it was engineering. I started studying structural engineering and was going to do my PhD research on a statistical approach to structural design. Now, this was a long time ago. Things have moved on since then, but back then, the approach was kind of statistics. Who needs them? We'll just build it bigger. We don't do that anymore. But I found out that I really was better at the statistics than I was at the structures. I love bridges, but I realized I would never actually walk on a bridge I had designed. So I thought maybe I shouldn't be teaching structures. So I became a card-carrying member of the American Statistical Association, which is kind of a nerd-ridden organization, and got my PhD in statistics through the business school. I know you're wondering, how'd you get to IB? We'll get there, I promise. I either have very eclectic interests or a complete lack of focus. My husband says lack of focus. I like eclectic interests. My first academic position was teaching statistics and operations management at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. And there I discovered international business. Yay! Started doing work on international business. And that took me to New Zealand, which in all honesty, I'm not sure I knew where it was. I kind of knew it was down there someplace, but there was a position at the University of Auckland for someone who could do research methods in the Department of International Business. And I thought, that's me. And fortunately, they agreed. So my husband and I moved to New Zealand. We figured we'd stay for 2 years, and that was 1997. So I'm pretty sure it's permanent. My husband grudgingly leaves the island we live on in New Zealand, and he hasn't been outside of New Zealand for I don't know how many years. But and University of Auckland is where I first met Yanthi. Then I moved to Victoria University of Wellington, where I continued to work with Yanthi, which was a great joy for me. Went to Finland. How many of you knew that Aalto yliopisto means Aalto University? That's most the Finnish I speak. Spent 4 years there, commuting between New Zealand and Finland. I remember Yanthi mentioned the time that I stopped in Indonesia on my way from New Zealand to Finland. I had left New Zealand our summer. It was like 32 degrees in Surabaya, and I moved on to Helsinki in February where it was minus 25. That's one of the joys of traveling. You get lots of changes. Then moved back to New Zealand and took up a professorship at the University of Otago. In the meantime, as Yanthi said, I've become quite involved in professional organizations, and then ended up at the University of Leeds. Wasn't planning that. Honestly, I didn't plan any of these things, but I wouldn't change any of them either. Okay, there've been good and bad things, but the point is that look, you guys are all really young. Look for open doors and don't be afraid to go through them, because you never quite know what interesting things you're going to find. So as I said, it was a messy journey. Okay, now the serious stuff. Okay, so how do firms internationalize? We've had people thinking about this for a long time, a very, very long time. And the field of international business has been going for about 60, 65 years, as sort of an official field. Typically, we think in terms of internationalization as being a fairly slow process. It's a gradual approach, and that's a gradual approach in terms of commitment. Okay, so commitment deals with how invested are you in the foreign market? Are you exporting your stuff, which is a fine way to approach international markets, but it's lower commitment than foreign direct investment, which involves setting up a company, a subsidiary in that foreign country. Okay, if you're exporting, then it's easier if you decide to pull back to just broadly stop sending your stuff overseas. It's a little more complicated than that. There are legal issues, but it's a lot less. It's a lot lower commitment to a market than if you say, I am setting up a manufacturing plant or even a sales firm there. So that traditionally we sort of think that the idea is that firms will kind of start domestically, build their domestic business, then start exporting, then go into more contractual alliances, and then foreign direct investment. So that's the commitment aspect. There's also the psychic distance aspect. And traditionally the thought has been that— okay, guys, please, yeah, thanks. The thought has been that firms will start pretty close to home and expand to markets that are culturally similar and geographically nearby. And that makes sense, right? Especially if you think about where this was developed, which was this thinking started in Europe. So you had firms, say, in Sweden. Well, it makes sense for them to start building their business at home, and then they can expand to nearby countries. Partly, languages are very similar, except for Finnish. But they could go to Denmark, they could go to Norway, they could actually go to Finland because a lot of people speak a lot of business people speak Swedish. They can go to Germany because it's still close, and the language, and a lot of, at that time, most well-educated Swedish people would speak German as well. So you're sort of gradually expanding. And as you expand, you're learning in an experiential way. You're learning firsthand, you're learning by doing. You take what you've learned, you bring it back into the business, and then that gives you the knowledge and the confidence in a way to expand further afield. Okay, so that's how we typically think of how firms internationalize. And this came largely from work by Johansson and Wittgenstein Paul and Johansson and Wallner, who were all working at Uppsala University. So it's called the Uppsala model. And it's a very process-oriented model. And the point is it's gradual. The assumption is this is gradual. Now, limitations to this approach. This Uppsala model was essentially based on observations of 4 or 5 large established Swedish firms in mature industries. Think about the limitations then. Okay, anytime you're learning about a theoretical model, you need to think about the limitations. Do we expect entrepreneurial firms in Indonesia to behave the same way as large Swedish multinationals in the 1970s? Yeah, probably not. So it's the way we tend to think about how firms have internationalized, but it's definitely not the way all firms internationalize. And that's where there are some nice, interesting things to study. At the same time, now, mind you, this was done in the 1970s. It seems like ancient history to you guys. It actually doesn't to me, which is scary. At the same time, in Helsinki, one of my former colleagues by the name of Reijo Luostarinen was coming up with what's known as the Helsinki model, because he was in Helsinki, or the POM, Product Operation and Market Strategies model. This model is, to my mind, it's much more detailed. It's much more flexible. It's based on a much larger sample of firms. Now, why haven't you ever heard of that one? Why has almost nobody heard of that one outside of Finland? Because Reijo published in Finnish, whereas Johansson and Wittgenstein Paul and Johansson and Wallner published in English. So one of the key lessons here is, even though Reijo's the Luostarinen model is much more usable, I think, it's not used because it wasn't communicated internationally. I mean, not many people read Finnish, like 5 million or so. So, if you've got great ideas, you've got to make sure that you're able to get them out there to the people who can use them. So anyway, that's sort of how we think about how firms internationalize, but it's clearly not explaining how all firms internationalize. Some firms do this very, very quickly. Many of these logos are things that you'll recognize quite well. Skype. My husband's in New Zealand. I've been stuck in the UK because of COVID since January. I have a marriage by Skype. Skype was, the software was developed in Estonia. The company was established by a Swede and a Dane, and they internationalized immediately. Okay, they didn't do this little, step-by-step, toe in the water, gradual approach. Cochlear, which is their implants that help people who are hearing impaired hear. That's an Australian firm. Again, internationalized very, very rapidly. HTC is a Taiwanese firm with mobile phones. Logitech, we all know because we all use. That was founded in Switzerland and Italy. Kaspersky is a Russian firm that does virus protection. Spotify, I'm sure you all know, is that's a Swedish firm. Mavi, you may not know, it's a Turkish firm that makes very nice blue jeans. These firms, every single one of them, internationalized rapidly. Okay, they didn't stop, and they didn't start slowly. They didn't worry you too much about psychic distance and, ooh, is that too far? Is that too difficult? They just went international. Now, many of them, you'll notice, it's easier to Skype is automatically internet. What does Skype care whether I'm sitting in New Zealand or the US or Indonesia or India or whatever? So a lot of these firms that internationalize very quickly are higher tech firms, but Mavi is a wonderful exception to that rule. They're blue jeans. They're very nice blue jeans. I only buy them on deep discount. But so many of the firms that we see that internationalize very, very quickly are sort of what we view as high tech, but not all of them. So don't let anybody tell you you have to be high tech to internationalize quickly. Now, what do we call these firms? We call them lots of different things. International entrepreneurship is a relatively young field, and we're still working on some of the definitions. So we call these firms international new ventures or born globals or early internationalizing firms. And this is largely work that's been done by Oviatt and McDougall, Knight and Cavishgill, and Rennie was the first one to coin the phrase born global, which is the coolest name. But personally, I prefer international new ventures or early internationalizing firms because I think it's a little more descriptive. Because a lot of these firms, I mean, if you have an Indonesian entrepreneur who is exporting to Malaysia, definitely international. I'm not sure that's global. So we need to be much more careful about our wording. But these are firms that internationalize very soon after they're established, within a few years. We can't decide on how many, but within a few years. We tend to think of this as something that's only happened recently, but that's absolutely not the case. Mira Wilkins, who's a professor at Florida International University, she talked about what are known as freestanding companies that were established in the 19th century, and they operated quite happily until World War I, when they kind of died out. These were what we would now call international new ventures. I have data from Finland that shows firms that qualify as international new ventures that were established in the 1700s. So this is not a brand new phenomenon, but we're seeing a lot more of it now. And that has a lot to do with developments in information and communication technology. It's not the internet that allowed the first boom of international new ventures. It was the fax. I know that doesn't seem very high tech right now, but it was pretty amazing when the fax first became widely available. And obviously, the internet and e-commerce have made it much, much more feasible for even very small firms located in difficult or distant locations, like the bottom of New Zealand, to have international business. These international new ventures, born globals, early internationalizing firms, they're often going for a niche market, either global or at least across some border, some national border. But that makes sense. They're small, they're brand new. So they're focusing on a small bandwidth of products or services. And many of them are innovative because think about it, they're new, they're small, they have to have a hook. There's some reason they're going to be able to sell their stuff internationally, and that's usually because it's something innovative. Oh, excuse me. Sorry, it was not going to stop. Okay. What we do see is that in an awful lot of cases, the entrepreneur has international experience of some sort. So the international experiences that you can get at ITS, go for them because it makes you think differently. And an awful lot of these entrepreneurs that internationalize rapidly have some sort of international experience. And what that does is it reduces what we call psychic distance. Now, psychic distance is the perception, it's an individual's perception of how difficult it's going to be to do business in a particular location. Think about that. It's really hard to measure. Okay? For example, if, although I have no obvious connection to Indonesia, I would have lower psychic distance if I were going to start a business, because I have friends in Indonesia who I know could help me, could guide me. That's going to make it easier it's going to make me believe that it's going to be less difficult for me to do business in Indonesia than in someplace else. Okay, so it's really, really hard to measure. It's a very squishy sort of construct, but it's really, really, really important, because if the entrepreneur believes that he or she is going to be able to be successful in a particular location, that's a huge part of the battle. So we worry a lot about this notion of psychic distance. Now, international entrepreneurship is much broader than Born Globals or International New Ventures or whatever we're calling them. But research on these firms that internationalize rapidly, because they're kind of cool, has really made the international entrepreneurship field boom in the context of international research. Now, what is international entrepreneurship? It is the discovery, enactment, evaluation, and exploitation of opportunities across national borders to create future goods and services. And that's from Patricia McDougall and Ben Ovia. Now, that's a very typical academic sort of definition. It's like, how can we take something reasonably simple and make it sound complicated? But the point is that it's essentially the reason I like this definition is because international entrepreneurship is not limited to new firms. It's not limited to small firms. It includes entrepreneurial activity in the context of multinationals. And I would argue that it's actually especially important right now, given the COVID-19 pandemic. We, as a young field, we don't have terrific theory for international entrepreneurship. We're still in the phase of observing what firms are doing and trying to make sense of it, which is a perfectly good way to do research. Now, some of these firms that I would characterize as international entrepreneurship firms, this is one of my favorites. It's a firm called Glowing Sky, and they make merino wool clothing. And they were founded on Stewart Island, which is where my husband is. It's our home. It's an island off the southern tip of New Zealand, and it's got a population of 400. No extra zeros, just 400. And Dill, who founded this firm, was a fisherman. Okay, we're an island at the bottom of the world. They do a lot of fishing, right? He had kind of gotten thrown out of high school, so you don't need a whole lot of education. Is a good thing and helps, but he's managed to do this without even having finished high school. He was a bit of a troublemaker at the time, I think. He started off printing silk screening t-shirts in his garage. It was our neighbor. And Dill always said, I'm not in the t-shirt, I'm not in the tourism business, I'm in the fashion business. And one look at Dill and you kind of go, nah. But Dill was right. Dill had an entrepreneurial vision. They've gone from t-shirts to high quality merino clothing. Merino is a nice wool. Okay, this probably isn't so useful in Indonesia, but it's a very nice wool fabric that sort of keeps you warm when you need it and keeps you cool when you need it, in theory. It's very durable. It's a lovely wool. It's not itchy. And this tiny little company that's started at the bottom of the earth has over 60% of their sales are international. This is all export. They have not aimed it at international sales. It's just people travel in New Zealand, they see their stuff and they go to the website. So, this notion that firms that become the entrepreneurial firms that become international, there's this sort of lovely story about how they view the world as their oyster. Well, sometimes it just happens. But this is a terrific little company. I have a lot of their stuff. High Design is another one. High Design is an Indian company. Its founder came back from studying, doing postgraduate studies in the US and sort of had a hobby of doing leatherworking. And within 5 years, they were actually selling in the UK. And now they're quite a large company, and you see them in airports all over the world. And it started again as a hobby and just blossomed. So a lot of entrepreneurship is not, some of it is very planned and focused, but a lot of international entrepreneurship is just sort of stuff happens, a bit like my career. Now, why do I care about international entrepreneurship? Because I would argue that it tells us that we can learn a lot about how firms internationalize by studying international entrepreneurship, especially smaller firms. There's a quote from a wonderful paper in the Journal of International Business Studies. You can see the third author's name. So increasingly, the IB conversation is becoming broader. IB is international business. From the focus on large resource-rich, well-established multinationals to also include young, asset-constrained firms that are evolving and expanding internationally very rapidly. This notion of asset constraint is really important because small entrepreneurial firms are making decisions with a lot less slack, okay? They don't have the big asset bases of a large multinational, which means their decisions have to be taken with more care, and the risk, the effective risk is much higher. David Teese, who's a very smart guy, argues that it's that by judiciously interweaving existing theories in the field of international entrepreneurship and international business with the capabilities and entrepreneurship frameworks, that we may be able to come up with a more robust theory of the multinational foreign direct investment. And that's really important because our theories regarding foreign direct investment, not very strong. Remember, we're still kind of relying on stuff that was done in the early 70s, and the world is a bit different right now. So as I said, resources are really, really, really important. And smaller firms are not always, but are more often than not, more resource constrained than larger firms. So what happens is that international entrepreneurship, it's very much about accessing resources rather than owning them. International business, when we talk about how our large firms internationalize, especially with respect to foreign direct investment, we're usually talking about grabbing assets and bringing them into the firm, internalizing them. Well, small firms can't afford to do that, and it might not be the best way to go anyway. So for international entrepreneurship, it's much more about, okay, I need this. How do I access it? How do I gain access to it now? I don't need to own it. I just need to use it, right? So then we start seeing a whole lot more emphasis on strategic alliances and networks. And we need to think in terms of different sets of key resources, things like the availability of venture capital. This is critically important for entrepreneurial firms, and it's very different in different countries. We need to think about that. The other thing that matters, a key resource for entrepreneurial firms, is the entrepreneur. The entrepreneur's experience is really, really important. Remember how I said that I had more influence in my family's small firm when I was 17 than I was ever going to have at Ford Motor Company? That's what can happen when you're involved in a small firm. The entrepreneur has way more impact than the CEO of a large firm. Some resources are not different at all. You still need to have something good to sell. It has to be a high quality product or service. You need to have good processes, because especially important for small firms, you can't get by with sort of slack processes because you have fewer resources. You have to be smarter about how those resources are used, and you need to focus on product and process innovation. We also need to understand we can't just look at small firms by themselves, because so many of them internationalize by supplying to large multinationals. And there's some great work by Professor Shameen Prashantham. It's called Dancing with Gorillas. You can Google Dancing with Gorillas and Prashantham. And a lot of Shameen's work talks about how small firms interact with larger firms. And this has to do with larger firms externalizing a lot of what they do. Size effects differ with respect to market and firm. These small firms are generally niche players, but what else are they going to be? But many of them are practicing what we actually view as disruptive innovation. The other thing that you got to remember is that small firms get hit much harder by external forces. Think pandemics. A lot of this is apart from airlines, this is hurting small firms a whole lot more than it's hurting large firms, because they just they have less slack. They're more vulnerable to external forces. And this is similar to firms that are operating in small and open economies, which we call SMOPEC, because we needed more acronyms. And the double whammy is that many of these internationalizing SMEs are also in small open economy firms. So they're getting whacked twice by external forces. Makes it pretty amazing that any of them survive. So what does entrepreneurship bring to international business? I think that the theoretical perspectives that we have from entrepreneurship add a lot to, they're very complementary to the economics-based perspective that we've typically used to understand large multinationals in some important ways. And one is the emphasis on the individual decision maker. When you're researching small firms, you can actually get at the entrepreneur. You can get at the people who are making decisions. So many papers you're going to read are going to say, the firm decided to do this. And I'm guilty of this in some of my work. Actually, it's not the firm that decides something, it's people. In a really huge firm, think a ginormous multinational. It's really hard to figure out who's made what decisions. In a small firm, it's much easier to understand how that decision-making happened. There's a very explicit consideration that decisions regarding all manner of the business are made under conditions of great uncertainty. Okay? How many times have you done a case, you've read a case and you said, that was kind of a stupid decision. How could those managers have been so silly as to have made that decision? We tend to forget that managers are making decisions under very imperfect information and huge uncertainty. I mean, how many people predicted the current pandemic? Not too many. And yet it's had a huge impact on business. There are just some things you can't predict. And this uncertainty is really, really important for large firms. It's even more important for small firms because they lack the organizational slack. They don't have excess resources sitting around. A large firm, if something goes wrong, it's probably not going to put the firm out of business unless it was a horrible big thing. For a small firm, it's much more vulnerable. So the effective risk is much, much higher. I think that as I mentioned, there are sort of small firm, international entrepreneurship allows us to think more in terms of how firms actually balance internal and external resources. It gives us much better ways to think about and study networks and collaborations, which are increasingly important, rather than focusing on internalization. One of my colleagues at Leeds is sort of the father of internalization, and I think he'd hate that I'm saying this, but that's okay. We think in terms of entrepreneurial vision and resource constraints. And what that does is that we see less conventional internationalization strategies from firms that are engaged in international entrepreneurship, and especially firms that are engaged in international entrepreneurship from the base of an emerging market. So in this regard, when we think about strategies for internationalization, it's not just about exploiting what I own, my existing firm-specific or ownership advantages, but more about going out there, figuring out what I need, and developing those advantages by accessing and leveraging knowledge and resources from a whole bunch of different sources. It's a very, very different perspective. And given the fact that these small firms, especially given more open, a more open global trade system, these firms have, even if they're small, they face strong global competition, which means they just have to be really, really smart and clever and creative. And we see this among international entrepreneurial firms. And this has to do with resources. This has to do with international mobility. Which the way we do business, the way we communicate has changed very, very dramatically. I work in the UK and I live in New Zealand. I typically will go to multiple conferences in a year. I typically fly about 150,000 miles in a year. I've only flown once this year. I flew in January. My United Airlines account is still at zero, which it's not been for about 30 years. So things are changing, and small businesses are much more vulnerable to these the impacts of these changes. They also their small firms face big constraints in terms of institutional environments, challenges associated with operating them in them. And remember, once you cross international borders, you have to think about institutions at home and institutions in the host country or in the country where you're doing business. I think that thinking in terms of international entrepreneurship allows us to really study in much more depth this notion of context. Context matters a lot in international business. It's kind of what makes international business different to strategy, because we worry a lot about context and how it affects how people do business. And context matters a lot here. If you think about it, an entrepreneur who's sitting in a large developed economy, I used to use the US and the UK as examples, but they're not great examples right now. Think Germany. Germany's not as messed up. They face a very, very different set of constraints and a very different landscape compared to those in an emerging or developing economy, or even a small and open developed economy. So where the entrepreneur and where the firm is sitting matters tremendously in terms of what they can do, how easy it is to do things. And again, as I mentioned before, access to venture capital matters, but many of these small entrepreneurial firms, if they're largely in e-commerce, they may not have a huge need for, I mean, they need some capital probably, but not much. I remember I was speaking with a teenager in India, and he was applying to Princeton for his undergraduate, and I was interviewing him, and he was telling me about how he and his friend had started a business. They were doing physical exercise consulting. So they were basically teaching exercise classes, and all of their clients were in Kenya. So, wow, kind of like a Born Global. That's kind of cool. Now, they didn't need a lot of venture capital because all they needed was a connection, an internet connection. and an entrepreneurial spirit. Now, this was obviously not going to be a business that was going to endure and grow, but it is possible now to do business in ways that we were never able to before. Now, I really like this field. I'm very enthusiastic about this field, but oh my goodness, it needs work. And this is where I need you guys to help. I think we have a lot of work to do to make this move forward. We need to have much clearer and more consistent definitions. We can't even decide on a name of these firms that internationalize very rapidly. We don't have an operational definition. And frankly, if you can't define it, it's really hard to analyze it consistently. We may need context-specific definitions. The definition of a small and medium enterprise varies across different countries. So we need to think about that. We need to do much more work about the nature of the linkages between international new ventures and large multinationals. Many small firms internationalize as part of the value chain of a large multinational. We need to understand how this collaboration is initiated and developed and how it's being blown out of the water at the moment by the COVID-19 pandemic. We need to think about how this is going to affect these small firms, especially in the short, medium, and longer terms. This is really hard to do because we have no idea how things are going to look even in a few months, much less a few years. But this is something we need to think about because remember, these small firms are much, much more vulnerable. There's also a new and emerging field of what are called micro multinationals. Most small firms that internationalize, they internationalize by exporting, which is a perfectly good way to internationalize. That's fine. There are small firms that have undertaken foreign direct investment. So they're small firms. They've internationalized by setting up subsidiaries or offices in other countries. We don't know much about that. In fact, the small family firm I grew up in had subsidiaries in Canada, which made it a micro multinational. Who knew? The term hadn't been developed back then. One thing we don't understand, whether firms that internationalize quickly, we'll call them INVs because I'm tired of using all three names, are they inherently different to firms that internationalize later? Did these firms that internationalize quickly and those that internationalize more slowly, at some point, do they look similarly, or is there something, what we'd call administrative heritage, that's in the international new venture that stays there and makes it look and act differently, even long after it's internationalized? We need to do a lot more work that compares firms that internationalize quickly to firms that internationalize more slowly in order to really understand what is specific to these firms that go out there quickly, because we don't understand that well yet. What the firm is selling makes a big difference. It's in many regards, it may require fewer or at least different resources to deliver services internationally rather than products. And then, things that you can deliver virtually are very, very different animals to those that have to be, if I'm selling pens and they have to be shipped, that's a very different sort of business model. One thing we know very little about in international business, full stop, is firms that internationalize, de-internationalize, and then internationalize again. We tend to assume that firms internationalize and just keep going on a pretty consistent trajectory. How do those firms look? And again, that's much easier to, it's much easier to think about in terms of small firms. Yanti, am I running out of time?
Sorry, yeah, another 5 minutes. You?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can talk fast.
Yeah. I forgot to look at the WhatsApp.
Context matters, as I mentioned, and we don't really understand. One thing here that I do think is really interesting is in many firms, there's the potential for, in many contexts, there's the potential for firms to learn about operating across different contexts without leaving home. Think about India. There are firms that find it very, I've spent much of the lockdown doing interviews with firms in India about internationalizing to other emerging markets. And there's one very large firm that they started off selling soap. And they're in the southern part of India. And they said, you know, we do really well in South India. We can't break into northern India. It's soap, for goodness sake. But they can't break into the northern Indian market. You know, different languages, different states in India are very different. So what did they do? They internationalized. They set up a subsidiary in Singapore. They're now very active in Malaysia and across the Middle East. But they still can't crack the northern Indian market. So for firms in many countries, you can learn a lot about some of this. You can learn a lot of the skills that will allow you to internationalize without leaving home. Does this reduce somehow the liability of foreignness, which is basically all the hassles that a firm incurs when it goes internationally? We don't understand how firms learn. There are challenges. Look, it's harder to collaborate across borders, especially if those borders are much more difficult to cross, which they are now. How do firms learn in terms of innovation, and how do they learn in order to support their innovation? I'm doing some work with a former student he collected his data in Iran. It's very hard for Iranian firms to cross borders in terms of getting access to learning that allow them to innovate. Now, when he started this, the reaction was kind of, yeah, Iran, it's a really specific case. It's not so specific anymore because all firms are now facing more difficulties. And how do firms develop absorptive capacity, which is something Yanti knows quite a lot about. And that's got to do with learning how to learn. You know, sometimes you can read something and you go, it's not sticking. Well, if the absorptive capacity will allow you to figure out how to make those difficult concepts stick and how to learn them. And it's the same thing for firms. We need to understand what is it about entrepreneurs that allow them to internationalize. Does prior international experience matter? Some people say yes, I'm not so sure. How does the home country ecosystem support or encourage international entrepreneurship? How is this affected by the pandemic? Is international entrepreneurship enduring? Is it valuable? You know, is it a flash in the pan? Thinking about the current pandemic, it's disrupted global supply chains, and that's had a huge impact on small firms. A lot of countries are now rethinking how reliant they're willing to be on international sources of supply for key products. Think personal protective equipment and medical supplies. And firms are rethinking how much they're willing to rely on transporting key materials across international borders because it's just harder right now. We're also seeing firms and individuals who are seizing innovative entrepreneurial opportunities. One of the nice things is when bad things happen, it's sort of nice to see how people rise to the occasion. And I think we have seen some of this here. We've seen firms have pivoted in terms of food delivery. Food delivery is a much bigger thing now than it was before. And this ranges from large firms that have decided, yeah, we'll start delivering food. Small firms that have pivoted from supplying restaurants, which closed, to supplying individuals, and individual farmers who are now going directly to customers. And I've seen examples of that in India. Face masks. These were not a big deal in much of the world. Now they're a huge deal, and everybody's selling an awful lot of entrepreneurial activity from individual ladies who sew and sell their stuff on Etsy to existing clothing firms that have pivoted to NGOs that are doing this. We're seeing firms that are now tying up and saying, you know, X% of what you spend on your face mask goes to, in here, the National Health Service. SMEs are rethinking processes in terms of innovating for sustainability. And I'm thinking of this very broadly, environmental sustainability, business survival, and maintaining employment for their staff. There's one UK SME that used the lockdown to think about ways to reduce their plastic use, because they said, we don't want to let our staff go. And this improves our business, this improves the environment, and it keeps our staff employed. So we're seeing amazing reactions. I think that the disruption is going to give us the opportunity to learn a lot more about how innovation is contextually embedded in particular countries. There are institutional environments, there are national innovation systems, and these create ecosystems that are different and are really important for small firms. And this notion of limited international access, I think, is huge for small firms. And as I said, we've been studying Iran as an extreme case, and it's sure easier to make those arguments now in these papers, which is not it's a little teeny tiny positive out of what we've all been going through. I think we also need to think a lot more about reverse innovation. 2 minutes?
Yes, 2 minutes, please.
There's work by Vijay Govindarajan and Ravi Ramamurthy, which is basically talking about innovations that start in emerging markets and are adopted in developed markets. This is a good time for us to be thinking about that and trying to learn from that. So what can other countries learn from innovation that's undertaken by Indonesian entrepreneurs? Theories, you don't care about theories. Okay, some people say we need new theories. I don't think so. I think we need to contextualize our existing theoretical frameworks rather than developing new theories, and really think about how the entrepreneurial perspective lets us learn a lot more about decision-making processes and psychic distance. There's a lot of work to be done here, and Indonesia is a fascinating context in which to do work in this area. So I look forward to talking with you about how we can push this forward. So thank you very much. And I'm sorry I went over. I tend to get excited.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation and what you find from your experience, as well as looking for the development so far. So we would like to, it seems that more opportunities for SMEs, and I would like to inform you that this semester I teach international business, and we have 29 SMEs part of the learning together. Yeah. As a lecturer, I learn, and here we have some questions. Pak Edi, would you introduce? Pak Edi is the cooperative leader. Pak Edi?
I'll stop my screen sharing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. This is Pak Edi. Pak Edi bisa? Enggak? Oh. Ada suaranya, tolong di unmute. Ya. Atau
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Professor Petrus. Thank you, Dr. Chanti. I'm Eddie from Leduk Cafe in Welirang, Mount Welirang in Pasuruan, East Java, Indonesia. I question to to Professor Petrus, how to cafe industry in your country, Professor? Thank you.
So what's the coffee industry like in the UK? It's improving.
So what happened is that we are working with the with also Association of Exporters as well as the government in the class together and include the SME. So then we can help them to promote to export actually, Beth. But we are still learning. So then Pak Edi would like to ask, what do you think about coffee industry? Will it be sustainable? What are they looking for? Because coffee around the world, you may drink coffee from different part of the world. What do you think about coffee industry?
Well, I think it's a fascinating industry, and I don't know much about it, but I'm a really big consumer. But what I do see is that, okay, and this is one that varies tremendously. In New Zealand and Australia, people are very, very concerned about good coffee. In the UK, they're just kind of getting there. But I think people are much more interested now in knowing where their coffee is from. And I think you've got a much larger portion of the population in many countries that will spend money on good coffee that I think 10, 15 years ago they wouldn't have. So I think it's a really interesting and probably very challenging business because it's got to be awfully expensive to be shipping coffee internationally. It's not light, but I think it's one of those. The thing about good coffee, it's one of those small luxuries. It's an affordable luxury, and so I actually think it's a really interesting. It's an interesting business to be in, but I think the target market matters a lot. And even within countries, it's very different. So again, I spend a fair amount of time in India, used to anyway. South India, coffee's really, really good. North India, it's appalling. It's like slightly brown water. It's gross. But North India is a tea area. South India is much more about coffee. So, but I would think that especially, from your position in Indonesia, Australia and New Zealand would be great markets to look at because people have the discretionary income and they will spend money for good coffee.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Beth. Because what we are doing is we have 5 students on each SME to assist them, maybe build the story, to introduce them, to help them to have Instagram or whatever. So we are still in the process. So,
oh, great.
Yeah. So you may take one of several packs of kopi leduk to New Zealand, Pak, yeah? And
Yes.
ask that to try.
I'll be very grateful.
Okay. Any other students? Do you have any questions? Where is? Wait. Let me put them. Yeah, Ali Sultan Abra.
Can my son is here
Yeah.
already? Okay. Thank you for.
Currently in Aceh.
Yeah.
Ali.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Ali. I'm actually from Aceh. It is a place below Malaysia. It's far from Surabaya actually. And I'm currently a final year student at Business Management Department. I'm preparing myself to conduct undergraduate thesis about also about entrepreneurship and innovation. But actually, right now, I don't really know what specific entrepreneurship topics that I should work on. But let me tell you some Indonesia context. Indonesia will have 2 unique conditions that in the future that not all other country will have it. The first is we are similar like a country like USA, India, and China. We have abundance of populations. Yeah,
Yep.
And the second unique condition is from this year until 2035. Yeah, we will have demographic bonus, which means that around 70% of our population is in productive age. So we have abundance population, and then we have productive age. So I believe, but it is good or not, it actually depend, because if we have a lot of productive population, we need more job vacancy. And I believe that entrepreneurship will play an important part in the future in Indonesia, because yeah, the more business are there, the more job vacancy will it be available for those people. So my question is,
Ali.
yeah,
What's your
my
question?
question is, my question is, based on Indonesia context, could you suggest us Indonesian students what should entrepreneurship research topic that we need to work on? Is it more in entrepreneurship, international entrepreneurship, or international or ecosystem entrepreneurship, or others? Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Well, Ali, you've raised a really, really important point. I mean, I've been talking about international entrepreneurship, but an entrepreneur who starts a business in Indonesia can actually, if what they want to do is to grow a big firm, they can do that without ever crossing borders, without ever going international. And that's a very good strategy. You know, it's very different, as you said, to someone who's sitting in New Zealand with its population of 5-ish million. The firm is never going to get very big in New Zealand, which is okay. You know, it may be that, you know, I actually don't believe that firms have to get big. You know, an entrepreneur can start a firm, and, you know, maybe the goal is to give the entrepreneur's family and employees and their families good lives. And that doesn't necessitate becoming a huge multinational. But I think really trying to understand the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Indonesia would be a huge task, but a very interesting research area. Because the thing is, even if an entrepreneurial firm wants to get big, they have to understand how things work at home in order to make the best use of the resources that they can access at home. So I'm not sure that if I were sitting in Indonesia, I'm not sure I would start with international entrepreneurship. I think I might start with entrepreneurship per se, really understanding the ecosystem, understanding how firms learn, you know, understanding how they make the decisions to go into different partnerships. I think there's plenty of work to be done there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. So now is Arshad. Arshad? Where's Arshad? Is Arshad there? Arshad, can you unmute?
Yes, Miss Janti.
Yeah.
Sorry, I cannot turn on my camera because it's broken, currently broken.
So, Beth, Arshad is assisting sambal, yeah, spicy manufacturer to export. So, yeah, your question, Arshad.
My question is, Miss Elizabeth, what does the UK and Europe citizens think about consuming spicy foods?
It varies tremendously, but I think it's a much better market than it would have been even 10 years ago. It'll vary hugely. So for example, in the Netherlands, people are quite used to Indonesian food because of historical ties that we won't talk about. But actually in the UK even, it's funny, the first time I came to the UK was about 40 years ago. And the food was horrible. Oh, it was so bland and yuck. And now, if you ask most people in the UK what's sort of a typical UK meal, it'll be a curry, and that's got a lot to do with immigration. So there's been huge immigration into Europe, into pretty much any country in Europe, actually. So I would think that it's a good market. I I think what you're going to need to do is to be really, if you want to have it be a very broad, if you want to sell to a broad group, sambal might be a little too spicy for many people, not for everybody. But is it possible to have sort of a mild sambal and sort of a medium and a hot? That might help people to sort of get used to the taste more. But I think it's a good market.
Thank you, Beth. Yeah, they need to do research on it. Yeah. Okay. Is there any other students or maybe companies? And we can see here some representative from Go Export and also from the government actually. Also Ibu Elok from the government. Yeah. Anyone want to ask question? Yeah. Yeah. I see. Oh, here, Irfan. Yes, Irfan.
Thank you. Is my sound clear? Sorry, just to make sure.
Yes.
All right. Thank you for the opportunity, Ms. Bethros and Ms. Jandi. My name is Irfan. I'm interested in asking about SME. Like, based on the data, there are a lot of SME in Indonesia. If I'm not mistaken, it absorbs 96% of the workforce. And based on that, we don't have a lot of sophisticated technology because SME is limited to with its capital. So my question will be, how is AI changing the international business? Since in Indonesia there are not many of a big company to do the international business, and there are only a lot of small business. So how is AI changing the international business? Is it affecting for the small business or something like that? Yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
Artificial intelligence. Yeah, that's not something I know too much about. I'm sorry.
I think, Beth, what most of the people believe, right? When you enter export market, most of Indonesian believe should be sophisticated, should be, like big company, full resources. So what you share today is very interesting because then the way small medium enterprise access resources instead of owning it, it's more important. Maybe I add question. What's the view of how do they grow this type of sharing resources of willingness to to allow or maybe to strategically access that? What differ between a developed country and developing country here? First of all, I would say the mindset is already different, but then they may at some point they was like us, maybe. So I would like to ask your opinion about this.
Yeah, I mean, I think what the government, that the assistance the government provides, and I'm not talking necessarily financial assistance, it ends up being really important. And you talk to entrepreneurs around the world and they're mostly grumpy about what their government is doing to help in terms of helping them to internationalize. But it's less about, as you said, having big resources, but it's more about being able, if the government could do things like, trade fairs and things like that to help facilitate creating those linkages. I think that's really, really important. And I think that doesn't matter, if the Indonesian government can put in some, I have no idea what the Indonesian government does. It might be great at this. I know that we've been talking to entrepreneurs in India, and different states do it differently.
Yeah.
But if to the extent that look, people are people, and people who are have common business interests, even though they're from different places, they have a common, fine, they don't have might not necessarily have a common, language that they speak, but they have a common way they think. And so it's about figuring out how to give entrepreneurs in Indonesia or in any place access to make those personal connections. And I think that's tremendously important, because even among the firms we've been studying in Iran, it's those personal connections that have allowed for linkages slightly. Oh, this is being recorded. And okay.
Maybe also including
well,
Asia.
There are linkages, there are informal business linkages that have been maintained between Iranian firms and European firms, and they've been fairly clever about getting despite the international sanctions. And that has to do a lot with, just their personal connections and trust. And that's allowed these relationships to endure despite the fact that technically nobody's allowed to talk to the firms in Iran because of the international sanctions. So I think it's about making it such that, sort of like-minded entrepreneurs can connect with each other internationally. I think that's really, really important. And that's something that governments should be able to do without that much of a cash outlay.
Yeah. Okay. Like us, for example, today you allow us to have this international guest lecture series because of the personal connection, instead of, we can afford to for the professor. Yeah. Okay.
And I was actually thinking that what's really cool about this is that we're making connections. Obviously I've known Yanti for a long time, but I'm making connections with other people who are doing really interesting things, and that's exciting.
Yeah. So this is also another question from Kato Dehydrated. Ibu, are you here? Or yeah, Kato Dehydrated is making the produce from dry, like.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Yeah, Bu, you can ask question.
Yeah. How about dehydrated foods? Chance with in your country, Miss Rose? Maybe we have supply to your country about dehydrated foods that contain of spices, dehydrated foods, and then vegetables, dehydrated food, then fruit dehydrated food.
So the question is probably like this, Beth. If you look at India, India is a very, compared to Indonesia, I would say India is very entrepreneurial. You can find Indian or Chinese everywhere, and they sell everything, right? So the products from carbohydrated food is more like suitable. I think it's suitable for vegan. They contain the ingredient for food products, dry dehydrated foods like flour from certain tuber or something like that, or yeah. So what's your view of this, and how do foreign countries accept the different suppliers, and what are their, how do they behave? So in this COVID era, do you see there's changing of character when you buy something, whether it's from India or from Malaysia or from other part of the world or not?
Okay, bear in mind I've been stuck in my apartment since March, but so I haven't had too much contact here. I don't think it's changing consumers' views so much. I mean, I don't get the sense that people are suddenly going, no, I'm only going to buy local. I would think, if anything, a company like that's selling, if anything, the dehydrated foods, because they're going to last longer, right?
Yeah. Yes.
That should be a real positive right now, because at least in the UK, as we go through waves of COVID, it can become much harder to get fresh food. It can become very difficult to get groceries. It was certainly in March and April. So I know I was looking to buy things that, in a sense, we're going to stock up. That would allow me to, if I had to go for a month without getting fresh vegetables, and I'm vegan, so I care about this stuff. I wanted to make sure that I had stuff that was there in case of a big disruption in terms of the ability of the grocery stores to deliver, or the ability of the supply chain to get the food, get the fresh products in. I'd suggest that the UK is probably a great market for that right now, because in addition to the uncertainty around COVID, we have Brexit looming, and nobody knows what's going to be allowed into the country come January.
So at one hand, it seems that Indonesian products in the food industry, it offers good supplies for foreign countries, but the thing is how they need to connect it. They need to inform them, and well informed compared to other. Right.
Yeah, and I think the hardest part is, okay, it's really hard to get products into grocery stores. I know that. Is it feasible to do essentially direct selling? Is it feasible to go on social media?
Yeah.
I don't know if that gets enough business, but that could be a way to go, or to look at small boutique type shops, other SMEs basically.
Yeah.
Because I don't think I don't get a sense that people worry so much about where their food products are coming from.
That's promising. Yeah, thank you, Beth. Because I see that in terms of our geographic location, we are in the equator, right? So relatively, we have both access to go down or go up to northern hemisphere or southern hemisphere. So, but we haven't. I think it's more about confidence and preparing to build our confidence to export. Yeah. So
you also have the advantage of proximity to Singapore, and Singapore is still going in and out of Singapore to a much larger degree than many other transport hubs.
Yeah. Okay. And Eva have to leave, so she said, on behalf of the department, she would like to thank you again for such intriguing lecture. She loves your consistency, sparking spirit while lecturing that stays in you. And she excused she has to leave early. She has another appointment. So looking forward to see you again in the near future. So stay safe and be blessed here. So, but we will continue back. We still have another few minutes. So I would like to call for the team of lecturers here. We have Rian, Pak Rian.
Oh no, she's cold calling now.
Yeah. So Pak Balwan is here. And we also have another team of lecturers, Ibu Dewi, and also Ibu Putih. So we would like to invite you if you want to raise some questions. Students, you can ask questions. And also we have Ibu Pak Andi.
Okay, Bu. Thank you.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you, Miss Rose. My name Andi. I'm from Medan, North Sumatra, but I'm living in Ho Chi Minh City.
So
Oh.
she's Indonesian.
Yeah.
So he is Indonesian. Sorry, he is Indonesian.
I'm
Used
Indonesian, but I'm living in Ho Chi Minh City with my family.
Yeah. Okay.
The first, as we know, in the world have pandemic COVID-19 is very seriously. Everybody care about their healthy and their life to continue, how to continue their life. So, in my question, for yourself, which a priority for you? What you eat and what you drink? Yeah, so we will know because in our country and in your country it's very different. So we will know, mean that maybe we will know about maybe like a more special in your country, maybe very scarce, very slightly and very detailed, like what you drink and what you eat. So we will know and what we can supply from Indonesia to like your country. If we can do to your country, mean that we can do also to other country like Europe or also in Poland, something like that. Thank you.
No, that's a really good question. I'm probably not the best person to answer it because I have a weird diet. But I think that, look, the thing that struck me when the first time I went to Indonesia was the amazing array of fruits. There was fruit that you guys have I had never seen before. And so that strikes me as, you know, that's something that, you know, as Yanti said, you know, you're sort of on the, you're on the equator, you can grow quite remarkable fruit and do fruit juices. And if people are going to worry more about being healthy, which here I think they are, they're kind of going, okay, what can I do to make sure that I'm as healthy as I can be to hopefully not get COVID-19? Then I think, you know, the healthier foods like fruits that people will not, you know, most people will not have been exposed to, fruit juices, you know, the dehydrated fruit, which will ship more easily. I think that's something that, you know, they can't grow in Europe. And Europe imports fruit and vegetable from all over the world. The nice thing about here is that it's required to be marked the source, the country source of the food. As an international business nerd, I find it fascinating. And when I unpack my vegetables, I look at where they're from. I don't see a lot of the amazing fruit and veg that you guys have. So I think that there's probably a good market. I think there's probably a good market opportunity. Now, downside is that stuff is probably expensive and difficult to ship, but you ship it around, you know, if you can ship it around Indonesia, you can ship it internationally. So you have the knowledge to ship it from one place to the other.
Yeah, I agree. Because Indonesia, from one island, Java, to the other island, it takes sometimes longer to go to Papua than to Singapore. Yeah. So, but I think we haven't looked this as our experience in the home country should equip us, should build our confidence to manage the shipping yet. So maybe, yeah, I would actually invite the representative from the government office. Maybe she has some question. Ibu Elok, are you here? Ibu Elok?
Yes.
Yeah. So Ibu Elok is the representative from the government office, trade office. We work together, and they're assisting. They have a program, intensive program, to promote the export of East Java, because East Java is having deficit trade. So we would like to improve. Ibu ada pertanyaan atau komentar?
Ada Bu Cantik sebentar.
Ya, enggak.
Hello Mr. Sibet, my name is Elo. I am from Industry and Trade Office of East Java. In my office, we have this business matching online with another buyer in the country.
Can you speak louder, Bu?
Hello. Music? Hello.
Yeah,
That's better, I think.
Yeah. No.
Hello.
Yes, that's better.
Okay. Hello, Mrs. Beth. Hello, my name is Elo. I am from Industry and Trade Office of East Java. The activity is one of our activity is business matching online for SME and potential buyer from foreign. And I have one question: how to find a potential buyer, especially for SMEs, to promote their product? Maybe do you have a trick to find a good buyer? As we know, in this condition of COVID-19, we cannot meet direct to them. Maybe you can answer my question. Thank you.
I have a feeling that you know more about this than I do. Gosh, that's like the billion-dollar question.
Yeah.
I don't have great answers. I think, I mean, this is pretty much what you're this is pretty much what you're doing in your office is creating those connections, right? Do you must work with, do you connect with similar offices in say Europe or Australia?
Yeah, at the moment, Indonesia trade offices have connection with the trade offices overseas. Ada berapa, Bu? How many, Ibu? I think we have 19 Indonesia trade offices overseas.
Wow.
Yeah, and they are trying to. We are actually trying to try various approach. One is through formal connection. Second is through Indonesians who live abroad.
Yeah, I was going to say the diaspora.
Yeah, and then the third mode is to engage with the migrant workers. Yeah, so but what we don't know is which path suit best, right? So then we are trying to. This is kind of exercising.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, one obvious way is making use of the diaspora of Indonesians who live overseas, or people of Indonesian ethnicity who live overseas. And we see a lot of SMEs. Sorry, I keep going back to India because that's what I've been studying. But a lot of Indian and even African, Nigerian SMEs, their primary markets are expats basically, or people of that ethnicity. And then it just sort of expands from there. But I guess that also depends on whether it's a product that's Indonesia specific or not. I don't have a great answer. Like I said, I think you know more about this than I do.
Yeah.
But I'd love to talk to you about it offline.
I think, I think we can do some research together, Beth, to find out.
Yes.
To find out what the best approach probably for Indonesian, because even Indonesian abroad, maybe they are their culture maybe acculturated into local culture. So then,
but not fully.
Not fully. Yeah, we don't know.
Because even if somebody is, third generation, or second or third generation in Australia, say, or New Zealand, there's still some sort of connection. In the United States where I grew up, everybody is from someplace else, basically.
Yeah.
Most of us fairly recent. But even, my grandparents were born in the United States, all of them, I guess. So, my family's been there for quite some time, but my grandmother was Swedish ethnicity. My interest is still piqued when I see a product from Sweden. So I think that's a much more, that ethnicity is much more enduring than you might think. And it doesn't mean that, someone who's second or third generation Indonesian living in Australia, it doesn't mean they're going to live the same way, but there's still a connection.
Okay, we may do some research for that to support the strategy of trade office.
That would be fascinating research to do, because it just dawned on me, coming from, I come from a country where, everybody is hyphenated. You're a something American, you're Indonesian American, you're whatever, but we're all mixtures, basically. New Zealand is very similar. Australia is very similar. Even the UK. There are a lot of British people, but there's a huge proportion of the population here that has links to some other country. And it's probably that connection is probably not something you would have recognized since you're in your home country.
Yeah.
I think that would be a really interesting thing to look at, because people in IB were starting to worry more about, the diaspora and think more about the diaspora as a market, but we don't really understand it much. So I think this is something we can work on.
Thank you. There's another question, Beth, from Ibu Syauki Surapati. Hello?
Hello, sorry. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. First of all,
sorry, I thought it's a girl.
Yeah. Hello, Beth, Professor Beth. This is Beth. Amazing lecture. I really enjoy it, and you seem really passionate about it, and I love it. Anyway, I have a question. Also, I'm Shauki. I'm not from business management department. I'm currently studying product design.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, but I'm here. So my question is, well, which one is more preferable? Start growing local, having a stable local base, versus or compared to starting big shooting for international. For example, when I start, for example, I'm starting a business, and then should I start locally, expanding in local environment, or should I straight up say I'm going to go international? Which one is better? And more importantly, for Indonesian business? Thank you.
That's a really good question. I think it depends a lot on what you're selling. What's the product or service. I'm pretty risk averse person. Ironically, I study entrepreneurship, but I study international entrepreneurship, but I'm very risk averse personally. I think I would be very tempted to get started in Indonesia because it's a big market. It's kind of like, for companies that start in Indonesia, in India, in the US, they can actually grow and develop a strong base and amass resources, resources as in money, and then use that to go overseas. Because look, it's risky to start a business. There's inherent risk. That risk is higher if you're going to do business across borders, just because it adds extra layers of complexity, extra layers of uncertainty. So if it's something where you have the opportunity, and even, I'm not saying that you have to do 50 years at home and then internationalize, but I think there's an advantage to getting a stable base, getting sort of to a steady state in the business at home. If since you have the luxury of being in a home market that's big enough, and then expanding. But again, it depends partly on what you're selling.
Yeah, agree, Beth. Partly agree, Beth. Because the issue sometimes, the Indonesian respect more imported product, foreign branded product instead of locals, right? So this, when they do portfolio, for example, 20% overseas and 80% still in Indonesia, then it shows that they can go to international market, acceptable there. Then the local will be more appreciate them. Because I see, like in New Zealand, people respect more on the locals, right? Yeah, respect.
Well, in New Zealand, people are there. There's a strong buy New Zealand.
Yeah.
Sort of
product
attitude to a degree, but that's largely because New Zealanders have seen so much of their value added part of their economy going overseas. So now it's more about pulling back and saying, wait, we need to support local businesses as well. And frankly, that's one of the things I love about this Glowing Sky business. They produce everything in New Zealand. It's better quality than Icebreaker, which is the large international competitor. And Icebreaker produces overseas. So, even though it's expensive to produce in New Zealand, they're still doing it better and at a lower price. And in New Zealand, that's viewed as something that's very cool. But what you're describing, Yanti, is not just an Indonesian thing. We find an awful lot of entrepreneurs, especially entrepreneurs from emerging markets, say that they go international partly because it buys them much more credibility at home. That it's not so much that they want to be international, but they want that credibility to bring home. So it's not just an Indonesian thing.
Okay, thank you. Sauki, are you happy with the answer?
Yes. I agree too. Because I kind of see refer back to what you said before. Indonesia is a big country itself. It has a big market, and a lot of business here. I see they're focused on trying to get international, trying to get global or international at least, while we actually have a big market to fill in. So that's why I kind of asked that question, which one is more important, starting local or starting to shoot to international? Thank you for the answer.
Oh, thank you for the question.
We have a last question, I think. Joshua, are you there?
Okay. Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. Good afternoon, member Trust. So I think my question is related with the last question. I have a question about the sport context. I think the majority of the buyers or some people will consider the brand before he buys some product. So to be a new sports, do you have any suggestion how to build a brand and how to make our partners will trust with us? And let's consider the many competitors that exist now. Thank you.
Oh, that's the big question. Yeah, and that's really hard for a small firm. That's really, really hard for a small new firm, which is why, to be fair, we sort of, when you talk about international entrepreneurship, you have this vision. I have this vision in my head of the small firm that's going out and gallantly doing business on their own. overseas. And in fact, what we see is an awful lot of small firms at least start off internationalizing as suppliers to larger firms, which isn't as glamorous sounding. But what it does is it allows the firm to develop their international their capabilities of doing international business, because it's different. That when you do international business, you need to understand the market you're entering, but there's also a lot to be learned about doing international business that's more broadly applicable. So one approach, one logical approach is to start doing international business by working with a larger firm. Now, what that doesn't buy you is the sort of immediate credibility at home, because you may not be selling your stuff under your own brand name. But what it does is it gives you those connections, those linkages that you can then expand on those and build on those to if you want to be a direct exporter as opposed to an indirect exporter. But it takes time. It takes what we keep hearing from entrepreneurs who operate internationally is you need feet on the ground.
Yeah.
Which is hard these days, like impossible these days.
Yeah. Okay. Is that a question, Beth, from Andreas? Andreas?
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Yanti, and good morning, Professor Elizabeth. So I am Andreas from Marine Engineering ITS. So I want to ask about what is the most favorite of Indonesia commodity that Europe citizen like?
Oh gosh, I have no idea how to answer that.
This is yeah.
Or maybe there are some commodity, maybe seafood. Do they like seafood from Indonesia? Or maybe there are, yeah.
I don't know. So okay, the problem with me answering that is that I only eat fruit and vegetables.
Oh. Oh yeah.
So
I'm sorry.
So I'm kind of no. It's just I'm kind of completely ill-equipped to answer that. I would think that right now seafood would be really hard to be shipping. Are planes going in and out of Indonesia at the moment?
Yeah, I think I may help him because we have the international business course where we look at the statistics of what's the import data. So you may contact one of our students and get the resources last week because we look at the data source to look who are the main importer of some products. So then they can have the better statistic picture. But it is based on previous pre-COVID. Yeah, so at least we know that figure. But in this COVID area, maybe it's even more challenges, but it is still possible, I think. Yeah, yeah, okay. Yeah, so
I think I want those data too.
Yeah, we are getting close to our time. So, do you have any message, last closing sentence?
Well, first of all, thank you all so much. I've enjoyed this tremendously, and I hope that this is the start of a lot of conversations. Please feel free to be in touch. My email address, Yanti, do you want these slides?
Yeah.
Oh, you have the slides. Anyway,
slides, yeah.
my email address is easy. It's just e.rose@leeds.ac.uk, or just Google Elizabeth Rose Leeds. You should find me. So please be in touch. And I look forward to continuing these conversations.
Yeah, because we will work in the near future with the office of trade office. So then we will also would like to learn from different policy around the globe how to you are working with SME and also internationalization of SME from developing countries. So I think we can learn how the success stories and other things. Pak Edi, do you want to show something? Pak Edi, I
Thank
will
you.
I will send Pak Edi's coffee to your place.
Thank you, Mr. Janti. Thank you, Professor Bet. I want send to my cafe for your Professor Petrus.
Yeah.
Thank you, thank
So
you, thank
yes.
you.
So
Terima
that
kasih.
yeah, Pak Edi we will send Pak
Yeah.
Edi coffee then.
In Desember 2019, even I the winner cafe in Riyadh.
Yeah.
Wow.
He attended
Arabica Cafe.
yeah,
Thank
he
you.
attended the Riyadh exhibition facilitated by Ministry of Trade, and he won
Wow.
that. He won as the
Awesome.
best coffee there. Yeah. So we will. But yeah, we still work out to make this export happens more regularly and more. Yeah, it's
Oh, I
becomes.
can't wait to try it.
Yeah. We will manage to organize it, Beth. Yeah. So, on behalf of the committee and the schools, I would like to say thank you very much for your presentation, Beth. Yeah. So and we wish this is not our second engagement. We will have more engagement in the near future. Yeah. Okay. So MC Pak. Hello, Bobby.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Janti. Thank you, Professor Beth. So, ladies and gentlemen, time flies so fast that our event today has come to an end. Sorry if there are any queuing questions we could not answer due to time limitation. If there are still any questions, please do not hesitate to let us know by email to mbusiness@its.ic.id. We would like to express our great appreciation once again for our special speaker, for Professor Elizabeth Rose, who already shared her knowledge, a very comprehensive and enjoyable presentation about international entrepreneurship and innovation post COVID-19 to us. And also thank you, Mrs. Janti Gunawan, for leading today's session. We also would like to thank all participants today for the cooperation and the question. We do hope everyone enjoy an insightful, fruitful, and productive meeting. And once again, I should say big thank you for Professor Elizabeth Rose, who has provided such a great lecture for us. We are very grateful to have you in this international guest lecture. And okay, I think that was the end of today's. I hope you've found this afternoon.
Will we take a picture together?
Oh, cool.
That's, yeah. So everyone, Pak, hello? Yes. Take picture for the, So not everyone turn on because they try to hold the credit on their phone, Beth, and also the connection. So they are students, students. They try to, okay.
The presentation of Rose, but sorry.
Oh, this is Ibu Yayu from the Arara Art.
Yes, I was really, really sorry because I was very basic going out and then I could hardly listen clearly all your voice. But I do hope that we have the soft copy. Thank you so much.
Yes,
we will share, Ibu.
absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah. So, Varian itu?
Okay, baik everybody. Please turn on your camera. 1, For the first page, we have 9 pages. 1, 2, 3, smile. Then the following pages, 1, 2, 3, smile. The third one, okay, turn on your camera, please. 1, 2, 3. Got it. The fourth, okay, 1, 2, 3. Fifth, 1, 2, 3. Sorry, I have very noise background. We have another lecturing. 1, 2, 3. Correct. 1, 2, 3. And last pages, 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
you so much.
you.
Please keep in touch, and thank you again, Beth. Yeah. So you can.
Thank you, Yanti, for making this happen.
Thank you to make this happen, and thank you for your generosity. Okay. So
My
everyone.
pleasure. This is fun.
Thank you.
This was worth getting up early.
So yeah, attendance, you can leave now. I'm still here. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Beth. Thank you. Say bye-bye to Beth. Okay.
Thank you, Bu Janti.
Terima kasih, Bu. Ya. Terima kasih, Pak Andi. Terima kasih, Bu Elok.
Izinlah, Bu.
Iya. Tinggal follow up itunya, Bu, surat-suratnya yang kemarin kita udah ngirim
iya.
surat pengumpulan data.
Ya, ya, Bu, ya.
Iya. Yeah. Good now.
Hey, look, I'd love to chat with you later, you know, some other time about what it is that you do. I can learn tremendous amounts.
Yeah. Yes, but we have a team of 4 lecturers. Pak Bahalwan, yeah, Rian. He studied in Taiwan. And Ibu Dewi, she studied in her master in Milan. Not Milan, Rome, yeah, Rome, yeah, in Italia. And then Ibu Putih, she used to work with the legislative, so national legislative. So now we are having this class for about 130 students with 29 SMEs. 25 of them from East Java, 3 from West Nusa Tenggara, and then 1 from Sumatra. Because East Java is, I would say, the best probably in terms of government progressive, like openness to support SME.